Okay, this time I bought a water bottle so my throat wouldn't get so sore as it got last time. Also, I'm gonna warn you in advance that this is going to be quite a fast-paced presentation because there's a lot of ground to cover. Because I'm trying to, basically cover UX as well as UI, which both of those, are huge topics. Okay. So first, UX, which is an acronym for user experience. Basically, if I would have to explain it as simply as possible, it's like a link between the designer and the user to make sure that the user experiences the game the same way that you as the designer wanted the user to experience it. Okay? So why is it important? So as I said, we people have different biases. It's we can't really do anything about it, and user experience is a way for game developers to keep their biases about the game in check, kind of. So one book that I would recommend is Game Usability, a book published in 2008, and yeah, that's the slide. So here is like a graph trying to visualize what user experience is. So it's designers, engineers, the artists, they define the experience. Marketing and marketing people, they give insight on what kind of an experience the market needs at the time, and UX practices, guidelines, methods that you should follow. Also, quite a good understanding about human psychology is again a big part of UX. Okay, so a recipe for a good UX is usability plus flow. Usability is how usable the game is, it's quite logical. We'll go into depth about usability in a few slides. And flow is, can the player reach the flow, so to say, while playing the game? A good example is like Plants vs. Zombies that has a really good flow about it. And as well, we're going to talk about flow in a few slides. Okay, so usability is making sure that software is paying attention to human limits in perception, attention, and memory. These are the three biggest, pitfalls of the human mind. And when you're designing a game, you should design the game around those, negative sides of our mind, so to say. So here's an example of perception. Those of us who know The Simpsons, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, these very minimalistic Lego pieces make a lot of sense. They have meaning for us. But those who do not know, I forget what's this cartoon about. So yeah, for example, this doesn't really make sense for me.
Yeah, bird and earth.
Yeah. A good example of perception. So you have to make sure that, you have to at least think about that your perception is might be radically different from the player's perception of the world and the game. Here is a graph from a study that a study about memory and how well people could recall certain memories after a certain amount of time. So as you can see, immediate recall is 100%. After 19 minutes, it's down to 60% correctness, and it quite smoothly goes down to like 20%. So yeah, that's a huge aspect of usability as well. I also have a video that describes how bad we are at multitasking.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13.
How many did you get?
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
I have seen the video and I didn't notice it. And now think about that when you're shooting zombies and somebody tries to give you a tutorial or something like that. It's not possible. You have to take that into account. Okay, the 7 pillars of UX, more specifically usability. First, there is science and feedback. Now there are 2 types of science. Of course, it's a gradient, and nothing in this world is binary. So yeah. First of all, here we can see inviting signs, as here in Zelda we can see like a few cracks. It's to give the player a sense of discovery and exploration, and here with exclamation marks we have informative signs that the player shouldn't miss. Next is clarity. One example about feedback as well. When the player is doing something, there always has to be feedback for every action that the player has taken. It helps the player understand the game mechanics and learn the game overall. What's dangerous about giving too much feedback to the player is something we call red overload, which means that you have too much red on your screen, so the important info might miss the player. Next is clarity. Here's an example about clarity. This is something that you should avoid in your game. When you're organizing your HUD or head-up display or something, you have to take into account everything: the organization, the font size, the font family, context, icons. Everything has to be cross-checked and cross-checked again, so to make sure that everyone understands the icons and the HUD and different aspects of the game the same way. Next is form follows function. Oh, sorry. Here's another picture about clarity. Which picture might represent the trap to you. First, there might be something like this, but after a few iterations and cross-checking, we should come to something like this. Form follows function is basically saying that in an ideal world we should intuitively know what the function or an object in the game world does just by looking at it. A good example is a doorknob or a tea kettle that you intuitively know you have to grab. But something to be aware though is that even though you should follow the form according to the functionality, you should still have a bit of a difference between even slight functional variances. So you have to be careful not to make things too similar. There's a golden ratio there somewhere. It's just basic testing and so on. Next, here's like a bad example of where the object or the decoration asset is too inviting, so to say. You walk up to it and you think that you should be able to do something with it, but actually it's just decoration. So that's an example of bad misleading form. Next is consistency. Sorry. This is about consistency as well. So consistency is very intrinsically connected to the form follows function. It's like an extra rule for the form follows function rule is that you can't be too consistent because you might dilute the functionality of the game, if that makes sense. Next is minimum workload, physical or cognitive. First of all, physical workload is, for example, how many clicks does the user take to, change the ammo type of your gun or something like that. Usually you try to minimize it as much as possible because that's not the part of the game. You try to make the core mechanics of the game as easy to use as possible, unless it's something like Dire Dash, where cognitive and physical workload is the core mechanics of the game. So you have to think about what are your core mechanics, and then is that UI or is that minimum workload part of that core functionality or not, and accordingly take action. Either minimize it or make your choices based on the design. Next is error prevention and recovery. So again, if your game isn't designed to be hard like Dark Souls, then you should be very generous about giving your player enough save points and undo buttons and so on and so forth, because again you have to make sure that your UI and user experience is designed accordingly to the core functionality of the game, and what experience are you trying to give to the player. So here's an example from League of Legends, which has an undo button. And last point is flexibility, which means basically that the options menu should be quite exhaustive, and you should be able to customize basically everything you have in your game. For example, a lot of MMORPGs have extensive ways to customize your in-game UI, for example. Now the flow. There are two definitions to flow. First is the conventional flow definition, where a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And then there's the gaming flow definitions, where the player gets so immersed in the game that he or she loses track of time and basically does extraordinary things without even thinking about it. Here is like a graph about kind of the flow zones in the game that shows and shows different player types and their concrete flow zones. So this is purely arbitrary. You can't really actually make some functions that describe the flow zone, so to say. It's all in your gut feeling and user testing and feedback and such. So if your game is directed to novice players, some Facebook games, then you shouldn't make it as hard as, I don't know, Super Meat Boy or something. People won't play it. That's not the right demographic for your game. And here are visualized the effect of flowing, of exiting the flow zone. If your abilities exceed the challenges that the game throws at you, then you're a bit bored, and if it's the other way around, you don't really want to play the game because you're anxious and you're dying all the time, and it's not a good time. GameFlow heuristics. First, there's these are pretty much it's the recipe for GameFlow, so to say. First, there is perceived pacing, which consists of challenge, pressure, and learning curve. If the player is not challenged or pressured enough, and he or she doesn't feel like he or she isn't learning all the time, then your game is slow and you might fall out of the flow zone. Next is motivation, which has two subcategories, extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic is basically goals that the game developer has set for you as the goals. For example, quests are extrinsic motivations. They fall into three subcategories, short, medium, and long term. Intrinsic, which is not designed to be a part of a goal, or more correct would be to say that it isn't worded or presented as a clear goal in the game. So control skills and the progression that you feel while controlling your character and while learning new skills. Also, meaningful choices and self-expression. That's pretty much the player feeling that their choices have meaning. And also social interaction. Again, not presented as a goal, but it definitely helps keep people playing. Also, there's emotion, which falls into game feel and implicit motivations, drives and instincts. That's pretty much how well your story, how well your story is paced and how good your story is, how much does the player feel connected to their player and the game world in general. Here's a little tip: avoid flow breakers. That those include unfair deaths, losing hard-won possessions, etc. There's an X there, I don't know why. Again, you have to think about, are the unfair deaths part of the game? For example, Dark Souls. Meet or exceed expectations, offer surprises. That's a positive emotion that makes the player want to play your game even more. If he or she is not expecting that you have thought the game out so well, then he or she might be positively surprised, and that develops trust in the developers and makes the player want to play your game even more. Crystal knowledge. So here's you might think that why have I listed all these heuristics when, I don't know, user experience is quite intuitive? So that's a pretty big misconception, and why user experience isn't intuitive is something we like to call the curse of knowledge, which means that you as the developer know too much about your game and you have biases, and you will not be able to pinpoint the exact problem that you might have with your game without having some sort of a checklist. For example, if user testing tells you that the opponents are too small, I can't hit them, then it might actually be a problem of the AI, that the AI is too unpredictable. So, and the path that the AI takes is too, the turns are too sharp, or there could be a million different reasons. It might not be that the enemies are too small. So the UX feedback cycle is kind of the cycle that user experience experts follow when they're faced with some sort of a problem or there's some functionality introduced into the game. First we ask why is it even in the game? Then how we define the functions of that feature or problem, and lastly we choose the form that will convey the meaning and the functions to the user. And then after we know the answers to all of those questions, we can give our feedback to the developers and designers, and then they can make the according adjustments to the game. Yeah, don't ask yourself if you can afford thinking about UX, ask yourself if you can afford not to. UX is not something to spend money on too. It's something that in the long term saves you a lot of money, because it helps you find problems that you might have with the game, and in turn make people like the game more and also buy the game more. So professional developers usually through Q&A and UX know about different problems that are in the shipped games, but they have decided not to fix them because I think that they have thought about those problems, but then figured they were not as big problems that you know they can afford to. Okay, what I'm trying to say is that you have to think whether or not you can afford to leave the bug or the feature or the semi-broken feature into the game, rather than if you can afford to fix it. Yeah. Is that clear? I don't know. You're so quiet. You can always interrupt me and ask questions if you feel like something doesn't make sense here. What I'm trying to say here is that ignoring UX recommendations is the thing that you need to think about when you're trying to afford something. Ignoring those recommendations is the thing that you need to afford, so to say. Doesn't it make sense? I mean,
Yeah,
like.
So it's like if your game is already good enough.
Yeah, pretty much. Is the game good enough so I can ignore the UX recommendation and focus on something else? Okay, that's a really important point. I want to get it across. UX is not something to spend money on. UX is an intrinsic part of the core gameplay development cycle. And next we'll talk about UI. So if there's any questions about UX,
Yes.
okay.
So regarding this motivation part, so can you go to that slide when you have the intrinsic and extrinsic motivations?
Sure.
So I was just wondering, like, so what if you have like an adventure game where the quests kind of have multiple choices and they have to be meaningful, and the user kind of self-expresses these are choices in those quests. So this is both extrinsic and intrinsic. What's your take on that?
I mean, in the GameFlow heuristics, again, as we'll see in UI, there isn't really, no game is really purist in these heuristics. They use a combination of all of them in some sense. And when you know how to, you can and you actually should implement a lot of those heuristics into a single quest or a single experience.
The same thing kind of with social interaction. So if you could have like rewards for 10 matches won in competitive mode.
I don't know if I would classify that as social interaction. Maybe that's more of like because the multiplayer game developers know that their AI is not good enough for real players. They try to they try to make the players play other players competitively, so their game would be just like a platform for people to match their skills.
What about like MMOs where like competitive
guilds? Or you're talking about guilds or
no?
No?
I don't think.
Oh, okay.
But I think in I don't know, in Neverland, for example, the player versus player part is really small.
Okay.
But there are like rewards for it. So I'm wondering, like, is it an intrinsic motivation that yes, some players want to go and be competitive, and then it's emphasized with extrinsic motivation, you get rewards if you're competitive.
Well, yeah, game developers surely want to express the intrinsic goals that the game might have with extrinsic tools. So it's just to get more, I don't know, motivation for your game.
So it's not like I'm going to have meaningful choices and then I need to put some goals and rewards which are something else there. And collect those items when you're adding to the game. It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's a gradient. There's never purely extrinsic, or okay, there's never, I should never use that word. But you very, very rarely find a game that's purely extrinsic. Even games that feel like they are extrinsic, there are always some speed players who find intrinsic motivation from that game.
And maybe about this when you are forward. UX is probably like some kind of a curve, right? Where like if you don't have a good enough game, then you really can't afford not to emphasize on that. And at some point, like you can not to afford spending time. But, yeah, so in the beginning at least, when you don't have a good enough game, you have to emphasize.
Well, I kind of disagree here because for me at least, and for a lot of the professional game developers, user experience and UX experts are a part of the core development cycle from the beginning, because if you're not ready to test and show your game and its features, then later on the patching of that game is going to be very expensive. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to say with this sentence.
So when like a new project forums and people come together and brainstorm ideas, they need you there to design this.
Well, not me, but
someone.
User experience guy, yeah, who is user experienced.
In my experience working for the mobile in iOS and Android, it's like it's the UX guy that makes it happen for us, in a sense, because it takes away the pressure on the developer to think about how things should look like. And the UX guy is the guy that's, he helps with the responsibility, even if its animations is kind of like magic to implement. At the end we see the benefit because he was thinking about the user the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. When you have a user experience expert in your core development cycle from the beginning, it's so going to pay off. Okay, shall we talk about UI now?
Yeah.
12 tips for creating a good video game. I wanted to make 10 tips because YouTube has 10 tips, but I ended up with 12 tips. So first, allow players to skip splash screens. Most of these tips are from my own experience. Splash screens are the worst. Make continue the first option when players land in the main menu. Again, to make the experience as seamless as possible. Do not place a montage video before the main menu, unless it's during the loading screen, like in Witcher. Make sure settings are automatically saved when they're changed by players. That's pretty self-explanatory. Let players know with some hints. Whenever an autosave is in progress, during autosaves there might be some stuttering, and we just want the player to know that it's about the autosave. It's not just bad programming. Although, yeah, it shouldn't stutter even though you're autosaving, but that's hard. Keep the menu structure consistent throughout the game. Design the entire information architecture. This has a little star at the start because this is, in my opinion, the most difficult part of designing a good video game menu. Designing video game menus is pretty similar to designing web designs, web pages, where you need to have correct structure and you need to make the player think as little as possible. Although, yeah, there are some differences, player usually doesn't, the player spends a lot more time in the video game menus, so you might make some design choices a bit more subtle than you might do them in web pages, but overall it's the same challenges. Okay, let players choose how their characters move throughout the game. For example, inverted versus standard thumbstick controls. Because a lot of players like to play inverted, I don't know. Use the standard controls, so a fairly experienced player doesn't have to relearn or rebind the buttons. Make the in-game map easy to find. If you have a game that should have a map, then it should be easy to find because players are going to use it a lot, and it's good if you have it as a minimap and then with a single button you can access it. Allow players to quit the desktop without quitting the game altogether. This should be pretty much self-explanatory to allow players choose their gaming sessions themselves. Sorry? Without, they don't have to reset the game.
So it saves.
Yeah. Allow players to rebind their controls, and don't give the players just the on-off buttons in the options menu. This isn't the 90s. We have sliders. The on-off is not good enough.
So in your opinion, if you to have like binary choice, I don't know, subtitles on or off, then you should have a slider with on and off.
Well,
I mean, games like companies, they have you put a slider.
I know, yeah, but okay, if you have 3 choices, then you can still have a button, that cycles through the 3 options. If 4 or more, it should be a slider, or some other form of choosing a multiple choice option. It doesn't have to be a slider, but it shouldn't also be an on-off switch, especially like in audio or even graphics. It shouldn't be low or high, it should be very low to extreme. Now, this is about UI in general. This is not about video game menus. First, use the interface to cue players about what's happening in the moment. I know I'm using Dark Souls a lot, but it's a good game. For example, when you're starting to fight the boss in Dark Souls, then a big boss health bar spawns at the bottom of your screen, and oh my god, that's a big fucking health bar. Make sure players can use the interface without having to refer to further instructions. players shouldn't be using the wiki if they want to know more about the game. Of course, there are exceptions. You know, roguelite games that that on purpose try to not give the player too much information. But you know, when you're designing a roguelike or roguelite game, you have to take into account that when the game is even a little bit popular, then the wikis are going to appear, and people are going to find each other on the forums, and they will know about your game and you know the guts of your game. Be unobtrusive. Don't let your interface distract players from actual gameplay. I think damn it. I should have put I had a good example, but I forgot to put it in. Being unobtrusive is the biggest challenge that MMORPGs have when designing their UI. For example, they have a lot of buttons, and it's really difficult to be unobtrusive, though you kind of want to be, because you're distracting the player from the core game. Use minimal screen space. That's pretty much connected to the third point of being unobtrusive. And 5, think about the input device players will be using. So if you have a game for the PC, then you know you should design the menu so it would be comfortable to use with a mouse, for example. The 4 main types of gaming interfaces. So now we're talking about the in-game interface, not game menus separately. Here on the bottom I have a legend that explains what these icons mean. If they have this sort of an icon, that means that they are that the interface is in the game's 3D world, and this interface means that it's kind of part of the narrative or part of the game. So first, diegetic. These words don't really, you know, they're meant for you to have some keywords, so so the communication would be a bit easier. So you know, if someone's talking about a diegetic game interface, you know what they're talking about. The diegetic interface is immersive, but it's hard to execute and implement. Here are some examples. For example, the Assassin's Creed Eagle Vision is a diegetic interface. What's the name? Dead Space? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dead Space game has a diegetic menu or interface. Also, Metro 2033 has a diegetic oxygen meter. Meta interfaces, they are kind of like plastered on the screen. They're 2D. Examples would be speedometer in a racing game. And what there might be some confusion about meta interfaces and non-diegetic interfaces. Meta interfaces, the biggest difference that they have with non-diegetic interfaces is that they are 2D, and they are part of they are the information that the player or the player character would know. It's like part of it's a way to give the player information that the player character would know in itself. Like, for example, the speed of the car, or in Grand Theft Auto 4, the mobile, or the phone, sorry. Also in Call of Duty, the blood splatter on the screen. These are all examples of meta game interfaces. Next is non-diegetic. These are kind of like it's like a link between the meta interface and the diegetic interface. An example would be this MMO game, or yeah, not very unobtrusive. And Spatial, this is a game interface that's part of your 3D game world. For example, in Forza Motorsport, they follow a different set of design rules and artistic approaches when compared to the rest of the game. Also Fable 3 and Splinter Cell, you know, that's Spatial. Here are my references, and that's pretty much it, actually. Are there any questions?
Yeah, so like you said that if you go back to those Spatial, okay, but now if you go to the diegetic, what's that word? Diegetic. Okay, and there's the clock, so that's like in the.
That's
game.
in the game. It's like the character would be watching the clock, and you are watching the clock through the character's eyes.
Okay, but then you showed the mobile phone from GTA and said that's not.
Yeah, this is an interesting example, actually. Sorry, where was it? Yeah. Here there is like a meta interface that is integrated with a diegetic interface. It again is not a 0 or a 1, it's a gradient. Here they found a good way to give the player information through a meta interface that the character would know, and they made these animations, and you know, they delayed the phone meta interface to be in sync with the character looking at the phone. Yeah, this is not a pure meta example. I should have said that, but I forgot.
So why isn't the clock somewhat meta example?
Because it isn't plastered on your screen.
Okay.
This breaks immersion, but diegetic interface is meant to be as unobtrusive and as immersive as possible. But you know, that's a really hard.
Then if you have some hard display, which is like you could have inside your helmet.
Yeah.
So this is like a bit of both.
Yeah, a bit of both worlds.
But it really, probably would not destroy the immersion of.
Yeah, a lot of, especially futuristic games, have gone that road. That they have all these fancy technologies, and then they have this mix of meta and diegetic interfaces. Yeah, that's a good compromise. It's not actually a compromise. It is a compromise, but it's a good way to take your game interface. Yeah.
Do you know any examples of virtual reality games that have, like, what are the options there that have been done? Because there is a totally different layer. I mean, we can predict the size of screen here, but when the person has the mask on top of the head,
yeah,
the peripheral vision is something different, and well, edges of the screen, so you will have to have some different approaches to that.
Well, yeah, this system isn't as flushed out in virtual reality as it is in conventional PC gaming or console gaming. Right now, although you can follow this system in virtual reality, the sky's the limit really. How creative game developers are going to be and which ways of displaying information they're going to find. So yeah, that's exciting, yeah. But I don't really know about that as much.
So one of the problems you face if you want to put something near the character in VR is that the resolution isn't that good.
Yeah, resolution, and you will have to focus in front, so there's probably tons of issues that you will
Yeah, first of all it probably feel kind of off because in real life you don't have like this augmented reality helmet or right? And secondly, like because the resolution is low, you can't read stuff properly. If you put this phone there, this is
but I was just thinking that in the traditional like 3D games that we play behind PC and on the screen, we have those things that actually you have those life bar and energy bar and stuff. Yeah, in VR you cannot really use that. You have to think of something else. I was thinking maybe there are some good examples already.
Yeah, well in Tribocalypse there's a tattoo on the hand.
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah. That's how we try to handle it. Yeah, that's how we try to solve the problem.
But the problem with that is that humans don't pay attention to what's on their hands.
That's probably will happen. It's a move you will have to make to.
It appears on top of your hand and shows stuff, but people don't notice it because psychologically they don't pay attention to what's going on around their hands.
Yeah, it has to be more obtrusive.
But actually a good example I thought was actually, it has two examples. So in Fallout 3, like even 4, especially in 4 when you go into the power armor, then you get this power armor.
There are a lot of games that have chosen the meta and diegetic like mix. Fallout and I don't know. Halo.
But in Fallout, think about, for example, the Pip-Boy, and it's kind of...
That's meta. That's diegetic.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that the diegetic part is only when only the animation when he moves it, then it's quite flat on your face.
Are you talking about Fallout 4 or 3?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In the fourth not edition, but fourth part of Fallout, I think it comes a lot more closer to the screen, so you don't see the Pip-Boy as much.
Yeah.
So, sorry?
You make changes, like the clicks in
there. You have, immediate feedback of the character moving his fingers when changing the menus or something. Also, if you can actually pan the hand and look at it when you hold the middle mouse button, I think.
And also you can have it on your phone.
I know that. Yeah, that's actually I don't think that anyone has used that. Or have you?
Yeah, I tried it. It was kind of strange.
I mean, when you're playing a game, you don't really want to.
But yeah, you need that extra head case, so it connects here, and if you turn to exit, it pauses the game.
Yeah, the danger with that is that it breaks immersion. It's outside the realm of the game.
I tried it, so it might be awesome.
Well, from what I have read from different game critics, they didn't really praise that solution. It was a fun experiment, but it really didn't work out as well as they would have hoped, I think. Okay, are there any more? One thing that came to mind is health bars. When you're designing a game and you need to have health bars, then I recommend having the enemies, having your own health as green, having the enemies health bar as orange, and when you're at low health or yeah.
What about when your enemy is green and you are red?
When your team is red, I mean, or what? What's the?
I mean the player is red and the enemy is green.
Well, yeah, of course. The reason why I recommended orange and green and red was because in most multiplayer games the teams are blue and red, and that's one big reason why you don't really want your character's health bar to be red, because when the opposition is red, then it takes a toll on your cognitive workload. But of course, yeah, when your character is green and when your character is red and the zombies that you have to kill are really green, then the health bar should represent the health bar should be colored accordingly. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're kind of saying that it's more important to look at the enemy's health bars than your own.
Sorry?
So you recommended that the enemy's health bar should be orange, so that's quite a noticeable color, and your own is green, so you don't notice it as much.
Yeah. That's correct. My recommendation would be to, when you lose health, then the part that you lost would be red, and then it disappeared. Also, when you're at low health, then your whole health bar should or could turn red to draw your attention to your low health. But yeah, when a health bar, especially a full health bar, is something that you have on your screen all the time. You don't want it to distract you all the time. So green is a good color, or whatever neutral color there is that fits into your artistic game. It doesn't have to be green.
So what do you think about I haven't actually seen the new Mass Effect Andromeda place, but previously there was this armor that was yellow and shield that was blue, and then the red something like that.
Okay.
So enemies had 3 differently colored health bars.
Yeah. I think Borderlands also used shields with blue and something. Okay. Yeah, I thought that this would take longer, so that's why I kind of rushed it. But
also screen placement of UI is really important. I read some research that adding things to edges is harder to loop. So center place is most optimal, but also it can cluster up.
Yeah, it's like a trade-off that you have to think about when you're putting your UI or HUD in the middle of the screen. The player doesn't have to look as far away as the player would have to look when the UI would be at the edge of the screen, but then again you have to make sure that your UI is not obtrusive. So a lot of games have chosen the path that when there's not really anything that urgent, the UI is pretty much transparent, especially if it's at the center of the screen.
A new thing I have noticed is that in some futuristic games, center places
Yeah.
divided by dial kaardisega.
Yeah, yeah.
The radio.
They have like a radio menu or like a circular UI in the center of the screen. Yeah, that's again as an example of a good solution to that problem, and to have like, I don't know, ammo and health at the center of your screen. But again, you have to be really careful not to be obtrusive and distracting.
And this radio menus, I think it works out mainly on consoles, but you can actually use the thumbstick to easily navigate.
Radial menus were initially designed for console, and when you're playing a PC game and you see a radial menu, then you know that it's ported from a console and it's designed to be used on a console. And that's really that you know ticks me off sometimes, because game developers should be ready to put in the effort to design a bit of a different or a better to use menu for PC gamers, and they don't mostly.
I have one more question. Regarding to the flow, do you
Yeah.
have any good tips besides wins and losses, how to determine if the player is in the right position there, or any indications that you might want to take into consideration?
You mean how to determine
If the player
is in the flow?
Yeah. Or I mean, the most amateur is the wins and losses. If some obstruction is in front of it, and can player deal with it very quickly, or will it take some effort and some losses?
Yeah, if you have a multiplayer game where then it's pretty easy to figure out whether or not the player is sufficiently challenged by just looking at the win ratio.
Yeah.
You know, you should keep it at 51% or something like that. But in single player games, it's pretty much, you know, user research and gut feeling. There isn't really a
maybe testing, local testing.
Well, yeah, testing, user research, user testing, and gut feelings, and you know, market testing to better understand the profile of your player. But other than that, there isn't really a number that you could associate with the flow as easily, unfortunately.
So, like, that would be a valid idea to have people just test as player of game and have a forum that how anxious were you considered then, how boring were you considered then.
Well, actually, some games use the question: was it too boring, or was it good enough after some kind of steps in the game?
That's kind of it's kind of what we talked about in my previous talk about, you know, just asking the players and the testers. Mostly they are pretty good at figuring out what's the problem. So, but they are pretty good at expressing what bothers them, but they are not very good at figuring out what's the underlying problem of what.
Well, you cannot ask what was wrong with it, but you can be very rather than.
You have to be really specific, and when you have your answers to those very specific questions, then it would be ideal if you have experiments and tests testing that very specific question and trying to figure out that very specific problem. Like, I don't know, even like a test world that, you know, makes the players shoot accurately or something like that.
If you want to measure something like player anxiety or relaxation or flow state, you can just hook up some electrodes and just look at the physical characteristics that they display, like the activity of sweat glands and dilation of pupil and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and a lot of the very big budgeted game developers do that, but it's really expensive and quite difficult to implement into your core development cycle.
Well, if you kind of have people play a game in some controlled environment, and afterwards ask them how much time they think has passed.
Yeah. There are.
If they're anxious or bored, then the time seems really big, like they overestimate it or maybe they estimate correctly. But if it's the flow part, then they underestimate.
Yeah, but the danger there is that you will you will that's just the the number, you will think that it's the most important thing, but you have to take into account the probabilities of that number, and a random chance is going to play a big part of your design choices, and that's not always a good thing, because sometimes a gut feeling is all that you need to have in order to make a game mechanic that makes your game a success. But yeah, of course, if you have the resources, you should just follow the scientific method and make an isolated, controlled environment and change only that one parameter, and you will get your results.
I mean, like, even if you think about the gut feeling, then if someone, you do have to, like, as a developer, you really can't play your own game, and you have to make someone else or have someone else play it to get some idea of how other people look at your game. So if they say that, oh god, I played this for 10 hours straight and I totally forgot to eat and all that, then this gives you a pretty cool gut feeling.
And that also might be just a problem with the player.
So you have to do it a lot.
A lot, yeah.
That's just stopping people like that.
Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you for listening.